Coming up on our newscast, Russian troops launch a wide-ranging attack on Ukraine. Ukraine border guards release footage of what they say are Russian military vehicles moving in. Explosions are heard in various parts, including the capital. Global leaders plan to announce sanctions on Russia. President Moon Jae-in joins Washington and its allies in related efforts. South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally exceeds 170,000 again, with an uptick in younger infected people. The country has the second highest daily infections in the world. Hello and welcome. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with the top story at this hour. There have been reports of explosions as well as air raid sirens and rocket attacks on cities across Ukraine after President Vladimir Putin announced a military operation in the Donbas region. For more on this, we have our Min Suk-yeol on the line with us. Suk-yeol, what's the latest?
Well, there's still reports about blasts being heard, although these appear to be less severe than the ones that were reported early this morning. The first explosions were heard around 5 a.m., and the initial wave of strikes reportedly targeted military installations, airfields, and government facilities. As dawn broke, heavy traffic was seen heading west out of the city, away from where the explosions were heard. In a televised speech, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the military was engaged in heavy fighting, repelling attacks in Donbas and other eastern, northern, and southern regions. Zelensky had also called on citizens to join the military and urged people to donate blood in hospitals for wounded soldiers.
We are already handing out weapons, and we'll hand them out to everyone who wants to defend our country and has the capacity to defend our sovereignty. The future of Ukraine depends on every citizen.
So can you fill us in on how the other countries are responding to this attack?
Well, shortly after Putin announced the military operation in Ukraine, U.S. President Joe Biden released a statement denouncing Putin's decision. He called Russia's acts as an unprovoked and unjustified attack and said that the prayers of the world were with Ukraine. Biden is expected to deliver his remarks on Thursday afternoon and announce further consequences that the U.S. and its allies will impose on Russia following a morning meeting with G7 members. Meanwhile, NATO said it will deploy more land and air force personnel, saying that it will take all necessary measures to ensure the security and defense of all its allies. Also, the European Union issued a statement and pledged to impose massive sanctions that would have serious consequences on Moscow. Well, that's all I have at this hour. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, so again, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, South Korea is joining the international move to impose sanctions on Russia. President Moon Jae-in expressed regret over the invasion. Yoon Jung-min zooms in on the response.
President Moon Jae-in has expressed regret over Russia's attack on Ukraine and said South Korea will join the international sanctions. After being briefed by the National Security Advisor on Thursday, his remarks were delivered by a senior secretary.
As a responsible member of the international community, the Republic of Korea sends its support and will join in efforts by the international community, including economic sanctions, to check this armed invasion and achieve a peaceful resolution.
President Moon added that the use of armed forces leads to the loss of innocent lives, something which he said can never be justified. He also said Ukraine's sovereignty, territory, and independence must be guaranteed. The president ordered his officials to be fully prepared to protect Korean nationals in Ukraine and minimize the impact on businesses. The National Security Council held 2 meetings on the issue on Thursday. They once again expressed strong regret and emphasized the need for diplomacy to achieve a peaceful resolution. Seoul's foreign ministry says it will continue coordinating closely with the U.S. and its allies. It also said if Russia goes ahead with full-scale war, South Korea taking part in sanctioning Russia, including export controls, will be inevitable. But officials added that they were not considering imposing separate sanctions. The Korean government has not yet characterized the situation in Ukraine as a full-scale war, with officials only saying they are keeping a close eye on the situation. As of Thursday, it is estimated that 64 Korean nationals remain in Ukraine. The government expects 36 of them to evacuate soon, while the rest do not plan to leave. Those numbers do not include Koreans in the Crimea and embassy officials. Meanwhile, Seoul's foreign ministry has issued a level 3 travel advisory for the parts of Russia that border Ukraine, including Rostov and Belgorod. People there are advised to move to safer areas, and travel to those regions should be canceled or postponed. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Russia's attacks and stock markets plunging around the world on prospects of even higher energy prices and other economic disruptions. The news lifted the prices of oil, gold, and government bonds. Kim Ji-yeon helps us look beyond the figures.
Global equities markets tumbled as investors rush for safety. Brent crude oil prices surpassed $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index was down by more than 3%. Japan's TOPIX dropped by around 2%, and the futures point toward heavy losses for markets in Europe, the UK, and the United States. In the session before, the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, and the Nasdaq plunged by more than 2%.
If tensions with Russia and Ukraine continue, if there is any type of military action going on, I think the Fed will reevaluate what it's going to do with interest rates. The real question mark in both the short term and potentially out through the rest of the year is whether we're able to get global stability politically in all parts of the world.
The whole world is expected to feel the impact of the situation in Ukraine. It'll add to the burden felt by countries that rely heavily on crude imports like South Korea and its companies. Korea's benchmark Kospi fell on Thursday by nearly 3%, closing below 2,700 points at the lowest level in a month. The South Korean government has said it's closely monitoring the situation to minimize the impact on the local economy and businesses. South Korea signaled the possibility of joining the U.S.-led sanctions against Russia, and this could affect South Korean companies Samsung and LG Electronics, which export smartphones and home appliances to Russia. South Korea's trade ministry held a meeting Thursday for businesses that could possibly be affected by the turmoil and is maintaining a separate consultative team for local importers and exporters dealing with Ukraine and Russia. Earlier, the ministry had said the Ukraine crisis is likely to have a limited impact on the local economy in short and more direct terms, given that South Korea's trade volumes with both Russia and Ukraine are low. Russia is South Korea's 12th largest trading partner, and Ukraine is the 64th. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
With another presidential election debate set for Friday here in the nation, the ruling bloc's candidate Lee Jae-myung called in related campaign members for an emergency meeting on Korea's response to the Ukraine crisis. Earlier in the day, he rallied for support in Chungcheongdo and then Gangwon-do province. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
Ruling Democratic Party of Korea's presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung on Thursday showed deep regret over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying Ukraine's sovereignty has to be respected, and that the international community should continue to try to work things out in a diplomatic manner.
It's even more concerning because the crisis in Ukraine is beyond being just a regional conflict and could lead to a new Cold War. A new Cold War would have an impact on the peace status on our peninsula as well.
Calling all related campaign members into an emergency meeting in the late afternoon, Lee also openly appealed to the government to keep the South Koreans still in Ukraine safe. In addition, he said work needs to be done to make sure the economic impact to Korean companies is kept to a minimum, and that the war is not far away and peace is priority. In fact, Lee Jae-myung spent the earlier part of his day in Wonju of Gangwon-do, a province that is divided into two as part of it is in North Korea. It was the perfect place for him to continue to reiterate his claims that he's the one to maintain peace on the peninsula. As Gangwon-do province has been pushing to become a special self-governing province, Lee Jae-myung pledged he would complete the process and make the province the forefront for peace between the South and North. Also, while on the campaign trail with the deadline approaching for the two key rival opposition candidates to form a merger, candidate Lee called for political reform.
This is old politics with only two choices. We need a third choice. This could be a scary proposition for the two largest political parties.
Earlier on Thursday morning, the chairman of the party, Song Young-gil, vowed for electoral reform and a constitutional revision and called for other parties to work together. He said a parliamentary special committee for reform will be launched as soon as the presidential election is over. Plans as of now include a new system whereby the ruling and opposition parties would jointly recommend a candidate for prime minister, as well as making it possible to have 2 4-year terms in office as president instead of just 1 5-year term. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the main opposition's Yoon Suk-yeol also convened an emergency meeting over the Ukraine crisis. The People Power Party candidate defined the situation as a major concern for South Korea. Lee Kyung-in shares with us his remarks.
Yoon Suk-yeol of the main opposition People Power Party condemned Russia's attack for violating international law, calling for bipartisan efforts to protect Korean nationals and businesses. Yoon also said the Ukraine crisis gives a lesson to South Korea that's technically still at war. He said a written peace treaty will do practically nothing to protect the nation and only strengthen alliance with the U.S. would, reiterating his security policy. For his campaign, Yoon rallied support in Suwon, the largest city of the battleground province of Gyeonggi-do. The former prosecutor general argued that he's the best choice to save the country from what he calls the ailing economy and social injustice.
I've been fighting corruption and crimes that give people pain, and I will equally stand up against those forces harming the nation's constitution, which is centered on liberal democracy and a market economy.
The remarks come as Yoon tries to distinguish himself from his main rival Lee Jae-myung of the DP in East political home ground, the province where he served as former governor. Yoon cited several corruption allegations surrounding Lee, including a land development scandal that took place in the neighboring city of Seongnam. At the same time, Yoon Suk-yeol is saying that he's not against the Democratic Party as a whole and is vowing that he will work with sensible lawmakers from all parties if elected. That's in line with what he said earlier in the day on integrated politics in an apparent countermeasure to the DP's push for forming a united government.
If I get elected, I will definitely do politics, not centered on self-righteousness and stubbornness, but where I ask senior politicians and experts and closely listen to what they say.
Some 300 former politicians from the liberal and conservative sides duly declared their support for Yoon on the day. Young-in, Arirang News.
Regarding the Ukraine crisis, Justice Party candidate Sim Ahn highlighted need for a strong response from the international community. Ahn Cheol-soo from the People's Party urged action from the South Korean government. Kim Hyun-sung tells us more.
Minor opposition candidates have spoken up against Russia's attack on Ukraine. Candidate Sim Ahn from the Justice Party said on Thursday in a social media message that Russia's invasion was an inhumane war crime. She pointed out the need for the international community to come together to put an end to this aggressive behavior and to reach peace and stability. Sim also urged the government to do its best to keep Koreans in Ukraine safe and to prepare for the financial turmoil that may follow, including the rise in raw material costs. Candidate Ahn Cheol-soo from the People's Party, on the other hand, criticized the South Korean government's inaction. He said that now is not the time for South Korea to sit idly by, especially when the world could be heading into World War III. Expressing frustration towards the Blue House, the ruling party, and the main opposition party for not taking action during this crisis, candidate Ahn urged swift action for peace. As for the Democratic Party's push for electoral reform towards a multi-party system, both minor opposition candidates responded with skepticism.
This has come up since former President Kim Dae-jung's time, but the problem is they never followed through.
If they believe that's right, then why don't they just do it?
Meanwhile, Sim on Thursday met with workers' unions in a bid to drum up support for her labor reforms. She also campaigned in Kuro Digital Complex and touted her pledges to improve work life, including the 4-day work week. Candidate Ahn Cheol-soo cut his campaigning days short, with just an election commission meeting in the morning and a visit to the Dosan Anchangho Memorial Hall in the afternoon. Ahn Cheol-soo was asked about whether merging with the conservative candidate Yoon Suk-yeol was still on the table. To these questions, Ahn said to reporters that the time for discussion had passed and the deal had fallen through. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Overseas voting for South Korea's presidential election began on Wednesday. Those registered have until next Monday in their local time zone to cast ballots at local embassy or consulate office. Shin Yeon sheds light on day one.
As soon as the clock hit 8 a.m. on Wednesday, some 21,551 South Koreans living around the world started to cast their ballots to choose the country's next president. This is roughly 10% of some 226,000 overseas Koreans who had registered to vote in advance. Consulate offices and separate polling stations in 115 countries will be open for voters until the end of the month. The U.S. is expected to have the most ballots, with over 53,000 Koreans in the country registered to vote. Despite having the highest number of registered voters, only 5% made it to the polls on the first day. Those who did come shared what they wanted to see from South Korea's next president.
I hope the next president can impose policies that can help millions of overseas Koreans living across the world.
China had the second most overseas Korean voters. Some 9% of those registered either visited the embassy in Beijing or 9 other locations across China to cast their votes.
I hope a candidate who can serve the country and help all citizens achieve their greater cause is elected.
Over in Japan, some 3,500 voters cast their ballots on the first day. The Korean embassy forecasts the number of voters for this election to be lower than the last election in 2017. This is partly because there are fewer Koreans in Japan right now due to COVID-19 and travel restrictions. Korean military personnel abroad were among those voting early. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said all of its troops dispatched in different parts of the world, like Lebanon or the UAE, have finished voting. Meanwhile, the Korean embassy in Ukraine has canceled all voting plans because of its escalating geopolitical situation. Around the world, only 11% of overseas Koreans have registered to vote, so turnout will be lower than in previous elections. Elections will be held until February 28th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. local time. Voters must have a valid photo ID with them to vote. The ballots will then be sent to South Korea and won't be opened until Election Day on March 9th. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
The nation reported more than 170,000 new COVID-19 cases again. South Korea now has the second highest daily tally in the world. There is an alarming increase in younger people infected. Choi Min-jung brings the updates.
South Korea on Thursday reported 170,016 new cases of COVID-19. Numbers are slightly down from Wednesday's tally, but the daily figure has now surpassed 170,000 for 2 days straight. It's also the second highest daily tally reported in the world after Germany. And South Korea's figure for Thursday is higher than that of Germany when compared by confirmed cases per 1 million people. The number of critically ill patients is also on the rise, with more than 60 patients added over a single-day period to bring the total to 581. But that's still just 9.3 critically ill patients per million people, far lower than the 31.4 in the US and 28.6 in Germany. South Korea is seeing an alarming rate of infection among young children. It has seen a total of 5 deaths from children aged below 10, with 3 confirmed in the last week. Children in this age bracket account for 12% of total infections. Currently, there are 95 counseling centers available for children recovering from home. With total cases increasing rapidly, experts worry that kids could end up left in a blind spot. To make better use of resources, South Korea's Health Minister Kwon Duk-cheol said that the government is considering classing people as having COVID-19 if they test positive from a rapid antigen test from a health clinic or hospital rather than making them get a PCR test. He added that the rapid antigen tests carried out by doctors are 90% accurate. Kwon also said that the National Emergency Medical Center will operate as a control tower to manage emergency centers in each region so that the health system can better respond to emergency situations that may arise among those with mild symptoms. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea is keeping key rates steady amid uncertainties, including the surge in coronavirus cases, rising inflation, and the Ukraine crisis. However, the nation's central banker did suggest there could be hikes coming soon. Ji-young provides a glimpse of what to expect.
South Korea's central bank has left its benchmark interest rate on hold at 1.25% amid the surge in the number of COVID-19 cases. The decision was made during the bank's policy meeting on Thursday. The rate freeze comes after the Bank of Korea raised its key interest rate to 1% in November and hiked it once more to 1.25% in January. The Bank of Korea said it decided to keep the rate steady as it needs to wait and see the effects of the previous rate hike amid economic uncertainties coming from the surge in Omicron cases and the Russia-Ukraine crisis. However, it hinted at possible rate increases in the future.
Because high inflation is forecast to last for a considerable time and the risk of financial imbalances should be reduced, monetary policies in the future will be adjusted appropriately.
The bank forecasts 3.1% inflation this year due to a sharp rise in energy prices and supply bottlenecks. It is the first time in 10 years that the projection has gone above 3%. Consumer prices in South Korea rose by more than 3% on-year in October for the first time since 2012, far higher than the central bank's target of 2%.
I expect the Bank of Korea to raise their interest rates again in April, especially if the United States, the Fed, decides to raise its rates on March. Korea needs to raise its rate because Korea needs to control rises in household and corporate debt. It also needs to control inflation.
The Bank of Korea also released its economic outlook, saying that the economy is likely to sustain its sound growth in 2022, with the growth projected at 3%. The central bank added that this year, South Korea will continue to see solid exports and a gradual pickup in private spending is likely with the easing of social distancing measures. The bank also expects a recovery in employment led by the service sector. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Temperatures will be on a warming trend from this point on. Daytime temperatures will rise significantly tomorrow for most regions. Seoul will be jumping up to 9 degrees Celsius, and other regions such as Ulsan will be even warmer with highs of 13 degrees. But under such conditions of fluctuating temperatures, it's easy to catch a cold. Please be extra careful. With relatively warmer air, dust particles will flow in from overseas. Western central regions, including southern Gyeonggi-do and Chungcheong-do provinces, will see dust levels standing in the bad category. Under such conditions, it is recommended to avoid outdoor activities, and if you have to head outside, make sure to have a mask that can filter out the dust particles. Morning lows will be 2 to 6 degrees warmer than today. Seoul will start up at -2 degrees. And daytime highs will rise quickly, but wide temperature gaps are expected. Daejeon and Gwangju will reach 11 degrees, and Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 13 degrees Celsius. On Saturday, central regions, including the Seoul metropolitan area, are forecast to see rain or snow. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
These are the stories we're following at this hour. From all of us here at Arirang News, thank you for watching.